She carried this book from 34th Street to this club in the pouring rain. Now, if that's not a buddy, then I don't know who is. Thank you, Nigel. Really. Unbelievable. Anthony, thank you for all your help. Despite my Italian temper, you're still with me. So that's because we both have an Italian temper. What can I tell you? We work together. And Giuseppe and all the staff at the Friars Club, thank you so much. I especially want to thank my no matter what friends who show Drama Desk Award winner for Zero Hour, Zero Mostel. He is also a singer, an author, an actor, a rap artist, and a sex figure. Anything else I don't know. I know you're all the above. And Steve, his partner, who is also a wonderful pianist and composer. So we're full of talent here tonight. Jennifer Tepper. Tell you a little bit about Jennifer Tepper. Jennifer is with Feinstein's 54 Below. She's their creative director, creative person who books all their talent. And she wrote 4 volumes. And you know how heavy these books are. They're hard to read. The Untold Story of Broadway. Yay, Jennifer. And NBC said it was inspiring and a must-read. Jennifer has curated over 3,000 shows. Godspell, Macbeth, The Performers, just to name a few. And she's also the recipient of the 2020 Lincoln Center Award for Emerging Artists, which is great. She's also involved with Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is the director of Tick, Tick, Boom, and Jennifer is involved with him also, which is wonderful. I don't know, because I can't see these cards, so they're useless. Give me a break. Anyway, Chad Harrison. Chad is going to be interviewing Jennifer tonight. He has been involved in show business since he's 6. He has been in Broadway shows, he's been in Les Mis, he's been in Peter Pan, he's been in, what else have you been in, Chad? It's okay. It's not okay. He's been in Maine, he's been in Peter Pan, he's been on television in the unbelievable shows Murphy Brown, Smash, my all-time favorite, I'm sorry it left, Blue Bloods, another favorite, and also Divorce, that's a good Divorce. And then we also have Jay Armstrong Johnson from Fort Worth, Texas. Jay's a triple threat. He's a dancer, he's a singer, he's an actor. He has the Drama Desk Award, he's been in On the Town, he's been in Phantom of the Opera. Hair, I understand, is one of his favorites, except we're not getting a song from that tonight, what can I tell you? But he's like unbelievable. He's also appearing in Feinstein's 54 Below, September 1st, which is his birthday, which is also my dear friend Jane Goldman's birthday. But he's at the Friars first, for a less price. I have to say that. Okay. So then we have Will Van Dyke, who is the accompanist to Jay. He is a musical director, he's a lyricist. He plays everywhere from Joe's Pub to Lincoln Center. He's been in such shows as A Little Shop of Horrors. He's been in Pretty Woman. He's been in Kinky Boots. Very good. Okay, so without further ado, I call to the stage Jen and Chad. We'll have a 30-minute interview, and then, of course, we'll do Q&A after that. Okay?
Hi, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Jane, and thank you all for having us.
This is incredible. My name is Harrison Chad. A lot of people get it confused. It's totally okay. My teachers growing up, my rabbi got it confused, so it's all okay. It's okay.
Did anyone in the 4 Broadway shows you started to get it wrong? Give us the dish right away.
Possibly Tanya Pinkins might have called me Chad when she first met me, but I don't know.
Harrison was in the original cast of Carolina Chain as well.
Yes, but we are here to talk about Jen Tepper, who wrote her 4th volume of The Untold Stories of Broadway. It's an amazing book. It was written during quarantine, during COVID. Why don't you first tell us what was the inspiration for the series as a whole, and then what was it like to actually write this volume?
I talked to a few people while I was signing books who wrote things during COVID, so I feel like we're all in good company of a lot of authors in this room. I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, shout out to the 561, and I always was very obsessed with Broadway from afar, as many of us are, and I was particularly obsessed with the Broadway theaters themselves. So by the time I came to New York to go to NYU, I was like, oh my God, I'm at the Imperial, I'm at the St. James, I'm at the Nederlander. I attached all these like historic stories that I'd read to the theaters themselves. So when I worked on my first Broadway show, which was Title of Show in 2008 at the Lyceum Theater, Broadway's oldest continually operating Broadway house, I was so excited by the idea of creating a book comprised of interviews with people who'd worked in each theater. And so each book takes about 8 Broadway theaters and takes you through their history chronologically from the oldest story I could get. So, the St. James, we start with, an original cast member from Oklahoma, and we go all the way through to Frozen, that kind of thing. And I was just so excited to interview people that get interviewed a lot, actors, writers, directors, but also stagehands and musicians and company managers. I've interviewed about 300 people for the books at this point, including Harrison, including J. Armstrong Johnson, and including Jamie DeRoy. So again, we're in very good company tonight. So I had 3 volumes of the book prior to quarantine. There will eventually be 6 volumes in order to get to all the theaters. I should also say there's one lost Broadway theater in each book, so a theater that's no longer operating or has been demolished. And when quarantine started, we were all like, oh, this will be a few weeks, this will be great. We'll get some stuff done, then go back to our lives. And at that point I was like, oh, this will be great, I'll have like a month to just like work on my book, which slowly turned into, as we all know, the like, a pit of despair, and then like, oh, this is relaxing, and then, oh, more writing, and the past year of roller coaster we've all been through. So because I wrote volume 4 during quarantine, most of the interviews in it were conducted prior, but the book is also filled with my own writing and discoveries and things that knit the stories together. So a lot of volume 4 is about things that we've all been through in the past year and a half. So there's stories about Broadway during September 11th that are very reflective of things that Broadway's going through now. There's stories about Broadway's first radio play, where everyone was like, nobody's ever going to see a Broadway show if they're doing them on the radio, they'll just stay home, which is very similar to the streaming conversations we're having, So there was a lot during quarantine that was very different about the book because I wrote it during this time.
Yeah, and I know you've talked about this before. When I was younger, I was in Beauty and the Beast during September 11th. We only missed one day. It was September 12th, there were no performances, and September 13th, we resumed performances. I mean, now we're how many days into no Broadway?
It's very impressive. It's like a year and a half. It's a lot of months. The similarities are really mostly about just like the rebuild of the industry, which was very different then. But still, there are things that I think we're looking at about that time, to guide us through this, even though it's so different.
And usually, you talk about this through your books, but the connections between so many people in the theater world, it's just remarkable. And something that you talked about is that you were like sometimes writing about something and then you go to see a show that night. Like you didn't really have that opportunity this time around, but it still feels like it's integrated into the book in a different way.
Yeah.
Because you're even more focused on history and how important it is. And I think this book is actually going to become such an important part of history when we look back to pre-COVID Broadway.
Thank you.
I guess something that, like, how did you do research for these things? Like, how do you find, I'm always baffled when I read these books because there is some facts in there that is like, how on earth did she discover that?
Yeah. When I started writing the first book, it won't surprise anyone in this room who's like in theater to know this, that I started with people I knew, that I was like, oh, this person will let me interview them, and that person. And before long, it was like a trail of like, oh, I would interview someone, they would say, this house manager at this theater, they have all the secrets. That's who you have to talk to. And I remember my first book has the Richard Rodgers Theater. We love that house, formerly the 46th Street, as we all know. I think we all know. But I started doing interviews about that book, and every single person at that theater was like, you have to interview the house manager Tim Petalina. The same thing happened. I did the Marquee Theater. Everyone was like, the stage door man, Ray Concepcion, he's the one. And so the people often with the best stories were like the gatekeepers of the house that would be there for multiple shows, not the actors or the people you would think to interview first. So I kind of let people guide me to other people. I also do like insane amounts of nerd research in books and in the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, all of these archives for every book. And I dig through the New York Times archive a lot. It was very much harder during quarantine to not have some of the in-person resources, including the Schubert archive. There were actually, there's a few footnotes in this book that's like, the Schubert archive was closed, so we do not have this fact because it's quarantine, which we thought was just another part of history we put in the book. But to speak to the other thing you said, I was so excited to discover, this dressing room, these are all the people who had it, like stretching back 50, 60 years. And there were things like that I would normally be like, oh, I'm gonna find out who has it today, talk to them, go be able to look at the dressing room and write about it, that there was just no way to do it. But it made me feel more like that, 13-year-old in her bedroom listening to cast recordings who really had to imagine it. So it's just a different project this time around. Do you want my microphone?
If you break it, you pay for it.
Use Ariel, switch.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to ask, I'll hand it right back to you. Something that the book does, and you sort of touched on it, that I want you to talk about more, is the fact that when people think about theater, they think about an actor or a director or a writer. But something that this book does, and you talk about the stagehands and the doormen who are so important to the theater, but it's shining a light on jobs that you can do in the theater that aren't necessarily like known to people growing up. Have you found that kids or people aspiring to be in the theater have like come to you and been interested in doing those jobs more because of these books?
Is this work? Yes. Thank you for asking that. It's one of my favorite things is that not only I get approached when I do talks at like schools and thespian events about kids who are like, I never knew orchestrating was something you could do, and I read a story from an orchestrator in your book and how cool that job is. It is one of my favorite things, and I also think it's made me a better, programmer of 54 Below and producer, because there are ways that I have interviewed like a sound designer and fully understood their job way better, so I can do my job better when I'm putting together a show, not just writing the book. So it's been like such a cool thing to dive into jobs that people don't know about and learn more about them.
Awesome. I would love to, should we read a story from
I think we
the
should
book?
read a story.
How about I read the Jerry Zach story?
Yes, I think that's the one you should read.
Let me get to the page. All right. 1973. The son of Holocaust survivors. Jerry Zach's director, actor. I was born in Germany, the firstborn son of Holocaust survivors. It was 1946 in Stuttgart, Germany, and I was a little miracle child. My mother weighed about 90 pounds when she was liberated from Auschwitz. My father escaped the Nazis and found her after the war. When I was 20 months old, we came to the United States and were sent to Omaha, Nebraska. My father worked in a supermarket. One day he came home because he couldn't speak English. He asked our sponsor what effing Jew meant. He had been called that by a fellow worker. When he found out, he went back to the supermarket and broke a bottle of Clorox over the guy's head. That's when we moved to the Bronx. We spent a few years there before we settled in Paterson, New Jersey, where I was brought up. I was a scared, overprotected kid because my parents saw Nazis everywhere. I was a good student and a good boy at home, and I had no interest whatsoever in theater at the time. I did have a secret, though. When no one was paying attention, I would lock myself in our finished basement and put on old 45s by Marvin Gaye and the Everly Brothers, and I would sing to myself in the mirror over the bar. That was my special ritual. I went to Dartmouth, and I had no idea what I wanted to be, so I was pre-med. In my sophomore year, I was taken to Wonderful Town on a blind date, and I truly fell in love forever. I had never been to a musical before. I was captured by the light, the music, the vivacity of the ensemble, the variety, the laughs, the story. The whole thing felt religious. It felt ecstatic. The only other time I'd experienced that was when we sang Ein Keloheinu, Rabbi. That was joyous. And this was a whole evening of a kind of joy I hadn't experienced much of up until that point in my life. I decided I was going to act. They brought back Wonderful Town a few months later, and I was cast in the ensemble, playing a Brazilian admiral, an Irish cop, a beatnik, and a bum. And I was hooked. So I dropped pre-med and became an English major. I didn't want to be a drama major because I wanted to hedge my bets. I started acting as much as I could, but I was reluctant because I knew my parents were upset by the idea. My parents were very simple people from a small town in Poland. For them, a life in the theater was for people on the outskirts of society. It wasn't what they envisioned for their son, who they managed to send to a nice Ivy League school. They saw it as me throwing away my whole education. Because of my parents, I was still reluctant to pursue a career in theater by my senior year. I started telling people I was pre-law. At the end of college, I finally owned up to the fact that I wanted to pursue theater, but I also wasn't ready to move to New York yet. I went to the MFA acting program at Smith College. My parents were sad about that. I had a ferocious need to succeed because I wanted not to disappoint them. Maybe I wanted to prove them wrong a little bit, but mostly I just wanted to be happy and proud. My 2 years at Smith were invaluable and I was deeply humbled. I went in thinking I was a wonderful actor, and I had 2 acting teachers there who really put me in my place. They taught me a lot, including that I was just scratching the surface. I lost a lot of weight and I started to dance. In the fall of 1969, I came to New York with my MFA and with my equity card, which I had just gotten from doing a production in Boston. I went to my first audition and I booked it. It was for a children's theater production of Young Tom Edison that I had seen in Backstage. When I got the call that I got the job, I was with my mother, and I turned to her and I said, "I got it!" And she said, "That's nice." My audition for Grease was on stage at the Royal. I cannot overstate how exciting it was. As a young actor, I'd never had that level of job before, and rock and roll oldies were my favorite as a kid. I sang them to myself over and over. I believed in my kishkas that no one should be in the show more than me. I stood there in the Royal and I sang 16 Candles and Rockin' Robin for the team. Tom Moore, the director, asked from the audience if I knew Hound Dog because they were thinking of me for Knicky. I immediately yelled, "Sure!" and launched right into the song and let it ring to the rafters. After I sang, I read a scene, and as I was leaving, Tom said, "See you again." And the writer, Jim Jacobs, said, "Yeah, real soon." There's no way to describe what the rest of that day was like. I'm not an exaggerator, but that was one of the most profound and happiest days of my life. I was cast in the national tour of Grease, and then later they called me to replace Timothy Myers, who was the original Knicky on Broadway. It was the greatest time. We did a really good show, and the teamwork involved was fantastic on the road and on Broadway. People shared the stage and had a great time each night, and the theaters were filled with camaraderie. When I was playing Knicky on the road, I had a way of giving people notes. I had that directorial control freak impulse even then. That was loathsome for the other actors sometimes. One night we were doing the Grease lightning scene. I came on and said, "I'm getting a car." And they said, "What kind?" My line was, "I don't know what kind, you moron, but I've got the name all picked out, Grease Lightning." That night, after doing the scene hundreds of times, I forgot the name of the car. I thought people could see my heart wildly beating through my costume. The 4 guys to my right were loving this because the guy who gave them the notes forgot the name of the car. I had to make something up. I said, "I don't know what the name is, but when I tell you, I'll tell you. And until then, that's what it is." I don't know how we got through it. The stagehands on Grease were the best. The show was the beginning of my lifelong love affair with stagehands as an actor and as a director. Local 1 has always been a great team. The stagehands on that show taught me how to read a racing form. And when the cast thought we were pretty hot stuff, the stagehands reminded us that we were okay, but, take it easy. There were great characters in that house, but when I came back for Lend Me a Tenor in 1989, many of the Grease senior crew members were gone, but several of their sons worked there. Young boys who had worked on Grease were now young men doing house jobs at the Royal. Working on Broadway for the first time really made me understand why shows give the illusion of being a family. I felt it big time on Grease. Meeting all the people who made it happen, the ushers, stage doormen, crew, and so on, made me appreciate the art form that much more. And the Royal always felt like a small, cozy theater. It wasn't that small, but it felt that way to us. I just loved it. The night I was cast in the road tour of Grease, I went to watch the show because I couldn't do anything else with myself. I was just bursting. I stood in the back of the Royal in the standing room spot because the show was sold out. And when the lights came up for intermission, I turned to the guy next to me and I said, "Great show, huh?" He said, "Yeah." I told him I was about to be in it, and he said, "Me too." It was John Travolta. He was 18. We'd both been cast that day and then had the same impulse, to see the show from standing room that night. We were in the first national company tour together, along with Jeff Conaway, Michael Lembeck, Mary Lou Henner, and Judy Kay. In 1976, I was in a production of Fiddler on the Roof on tour with Zero Mostel. My parents came backstage afterwards and spoke to Zero in Yiddish for about 20 minutes. Finally, my father asked Zero, "Is my kid going to be all right in this fakakta business?" And Zero said in Yiddish, "Not to worry, he's going to be fantastic." That was the moment my parents started to stop worrying. I had already played Kaniki in Greece on tour and on Broadway, but Zero was what did it for them. They got it. I mean, reading stuff like that is what you get through this entire book, and you can sit for 5 minutes and read one story, or sit for 3 hours and read the whole book, and every single story is like that. And something that he says in there that I just love is he includes everybody in the theater. And I know he's a director, but knowing that as an actor growing up, it's like really awesome to read that. And it's also really cool for me personally, because I'm a reader for casting sessions a lot, and I do some shows where Jerry Zaks is the director. And reading this after having been in a room with him a ton of times, it is just like mind-boggling to get to know the history that lives in him.
One of my favorite things about, great job, great job. Thank you for reading that. One of my favorite things about this volume was it is very much the Grease volume. So the Jacobs Theater, formerly Royale, is in this volume. And so I got to interview so many people about that show, which I don't know if you guys know this, had the longest running poker game on Broadway. During Grease, they started a poker game in the basement, and because that theater is connected to 2 other Broadway theaters, literally connected, like they share a stage door, and also on the same block as so many other theaters, it would be like stagehands and musicians and actors in between cues all running for that basement to like play a hand of poker. And so for like 15 years, from Grease till past Grease, they had this, and like Elizabeth Taylor would come play a hand, and hey, there's no one in the pit for summer nights because they're all playing poker in the basement. They kept coming up. I think Jerry Zaks is actually the only person I interviewed about Grease that didn't talk about the poker game, which is fine. He had many other much more meaningful things to say, but I do love the poker game stories. And yeah, there's just so many things that connect, as you said, like the physical history of the house.
Yeah, and something that you kind of touched on with Grease. Grease started at this theater, the Eden Theater, and sort of transitioned into the lost theaters that you talk about in this volume and that you talked about. Is like, it's so incredible to read stories about theaters that don't exist anymore and to learn about the history. I lived for most of COVID, for most of quarantine with my girlfriend. Near her place is the original Eden Theater, which was a Yiddish theater. I didn't know that. I walked by it a million times. It's a movie theater now. But it's so incredible. You start to look at buildings in New York differently and learn about the history of the buildings themselves while also reading about the stories.
Totally. It is I keep saying it's one of my favorite things, but really the Lost Theaters are one of my favorite things to write about. And this is the 4th volume, and it's the time when I was like, oh, I'm finally ready to write about the Fallen 5, which are the 5 Broadway houses that were demolished to make way for the Marriott Marquis in 1982. And so the Morosco, the Bijou, the Old Helen Hayes, the Gaiety, and the Astor are in this volume. The Gaiety and the Astor stopped being Broadway houses so long ago that there was nobody I could interview who had actually worked there, which is just emblematic of like, that's exactly why. Like, we have to talk to people while they're around to tell us about these houses. But it was so exciting to write about those theaters, and something I completely didn't expect, even having been an obsessive nerd about this for so long, was that we have 41 Broadway houses now, and they're all landmarked. Some of them, like, oh, it's just the exterior, it's just the interior, or this part isn't. But within the 41, everything is almost completely landmarked. And that is because these 5 theaters were demolished, because so many people tried to save them, and very sadly it didn't happen, but that was what led the New York City Landmark Committee to landmark all the other houses. So if we hadn't lost the Roscoe, the Bijou, we might not have the Court, the Longacre, who knows? And so it was a nice thing to have like a silver lining of like, here's a really sad moment in history. Wait, something good happened from it during like the depths of quarantine as I was writing about those houses.
Yeah, I love even out of something that is so tragic at all. And you said there were protests and there were people on the street. I have a quote written down from Mary Louise Wilson about the Helen Hayes. When it rained at the Helen Hayes, it rained on stage, but it was just a soft sprinkling. Like to learn sort of stories about these theaters that don't exist anymore, you really get a sense of what they're like. But Mary Louise Wilson's interview was really cool because Jen and I were actually in the car on the way to Dear Evan Hansen opening night at Arena Stage, and Jen had this interview scheduled with Mary Louise Wilson. And so in the 4-hour car ride to DC, on speakerphone, she's doing this interview, and it made me think to ask you, what is like is that the weirdest place you've ever done an interview? Like
in your car? Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's true. Since I've done about 300, I've done all kinds of crazy places that I've met people. The most exciting thing, though, I think, was writing the first book, because that's when I did about 200 of the interviews, and then for each subsequent book, it's been like 30 additional that fill in the blanks for those specific houses. Mary Louise Wilson's was awesome. We were going to see our good friend's opening night, and I was like, I'm gonna just do this in the car, just talking about Grey Gardens on the Turnpike. It was great. But I think the first book, there were days when I would schedule an interview at like 10 a.m., noon, 2 p.m., 4 p.m., 6 p.m. And I remember there was a day when I interviewed like William Ivy Long at his costume studio at 10, Lin-Manuel Miranda at a restaurant in the Heights at noon, Danny Burstein in Riverside Park at 2, and I wish I could remember the others. Marilyn Dunow from the original West Side Story at a dance studio. And then I don't remember the last one, but it was like I had all these stacked days where it felt like it became part of the book. Like part of the story was that I was this 20-something being like, tell me all the facts, and I was running through New York getting them in all these like locations that felt relevant to the interviews and the interviewees. I've gotten to go to a lot of people's dressing rooms, a lot of people's apartments, and it helps tell the story of who they are. I'm trying to think of the weirdest place though. I'm not 100% positive.
You were telling me before you did an interview here before.
I think I did. I was trying to trace this back. I believe I did an interview here in 2013. I'm gonna have to find out, in the dining room downstairs. I'll keep you guys posted.
I think it's incredible that you kind of dove in and just started interviewing all these people. Something that just made me think of. Have you ever like revealed something to someone that they didn't know about a show they did? No, I'm serious.
Give me this book. I'm going to read one of Harrison's stories. It's shorter than Jerry Zach's, but equally as tasty. I like it a lot. Because I revealed something to you. I think you're cueing me to say that.
I actually wasn't, but sure.
Okay. 71, right? 2002, a barricade accident. Harrison Chad, actor. There are 5 kids in the company of Les Mis at any given time, 3 girls and 2 boys. We used to play games backstage. At one point, all of us wrote a full-length play called Family Reunion, where the 5 of us were the stars.
It was a good play.
We had a regular named Jim Cleveland, who was the coolest. He would do funny voices for us. I went to college at Brown years later, and one of the kids I did Les Mis with, Jimmy, was there too. We had switched off Gavroche on Broadway together. We used to tease each other that one of us might have to go on as Eponine. We heard that one of the boys in the show had to do that years earlier. We never rehearsed it though. I always wanted to be in the softball league, but as a kid I wasn't allowed to do it. I had to go up to the field with my cast and be the mascot, which sucked. But every show at intermission, the guys who played the students would play hacky sack on stage. Sometimes I played along. That was cool. Every 2 months, all the kids would get called into the stage manager's office to get measured. There was a height requirement you had to stay under in order to play a kid in the show. As we walked to stage management, we'd all sing Happy Trails as a joke. Then we'd get measured and know right then and there if we were still in the show because the height requirement was exact. Kids were given their 4 weeks notice on the spot.
It was really brutal.
Some kids tried to scrunch down, but I always stood tall because I was like, screw it. In the second act as Gavroche, I had to climb over the barricade. One matinee, as I was climbing over, the piece of wood I was hanging onto broke, and I fell off the 13-foot-high barricade to the ground. I later found out that I fell on my side and hit my head on one of the dummies. I blacked out for 30 seconds. I was lucky I landed on the dummy because otherwise it could have been a lot worse. When I opened my eyes, I started hysterically crying, but I got up and looked out and sang the end of Little People. I knew the show had to go on. Good job, Harrison. It had to have been one of the most realistic things the audience had ever seen on stage. I was sobbing as I got shot. It was the only time people stood for me in a standing ovation. Then the turntable spun around. Everyone on the other side was supposed to look stunned by my death, and that afternoon they were actually stunned because of the fall. Immediately after I got off stage, the stage managers rushed me to the hospital. Usually the rush goes on for the last scene, until you hear the people sing, and the bows. I wasn't there that night. Instead, I was at Mount Sinai getting an MRI. Luckily, nothing was wrong with me. I was just bruised. I wasn't on for the show that night, but I wanted to show everyone I was okay and go to the theater. My mom wanted me to go home and rest, but I won the fight and we went back to the Imperial. I said to everyone, "I'm here," and then I sat in my dressing room. I was proud of myself. The crew took the piece that broke off of the barricade and they put it on a wooden platform. They wrote on it, "Les Mis Trooper, Harrison Chad, May 21st, 2002, and had every person in the cast and crew sign it. I still have it in my parents' basement. Okay, so I should say the reveal, which really, no, go ahead.
Well, so there was I know it was a small part in the story, but we had always heard of, there was this one kid who had gotten to go on as young Eponine. And we all wanted to go on as young Eponine, right? Like, it was the coolest thing. We played Gavroche. There were 2 boys playing Gavroche. There were 3 girls switching off as young Eponine Cosette, and there was an understudy. One night, 2 of the girls weren't there, so a boy had to go on. And we thought it was the coolest thing ever. 3 stories later in Jen's book, Jason Tam's story, he talks about getting to go on as young Eponine in Les Mis, and we finally figured out who that was. And I literally called Jen that day, and I was freaking out.
Solving a mystery.
Yeah.
I've done a few of those, but I have to say, somone that we work with all the time, a mystery 20 years later getting solved was very funny and special. But there have been a lot of those. There's been someone left this underneath the 3rd desk on the 4th floor, and blah blah, and then someone else will solve it. It happens all the time, and it's really cool.
Yeah. So wait, I now want to, before we move on to the singing
What
part,
time is it?
I would love to move to some questions from the audience, if there are any out there.
Shout them out.
Not all at once.
We can also keep talking for another few minutes.
Ariel, did you do the summer festival on 42nd Street area?
So you're thinking of Ariel Tepper, who's no relation, but she is in the book, and we get asked this all the time because Tepper's not a very common name. So she's an amazing producer, and I got to interview her about her work with John Leguizamo, like a million other things. So yeah, but no relation. Favorite show to see? My favorite show of all time is Merrily We Roll Along. Any Merrily Sondheim fans in the house? So the Merrily section of Volume 1 goes backwards, which is a little joke for myself. Sure. So thank you for those who don't know. So I'm the creative and programming director at Feinstein's 54 Below, where, as mentioned, Jay, who I have collaborated with since college, we went to NYU together, is doing a concert on September 1st. I've been there since. Actually, what's crazy is I got my job as the creative director at 54 Below right when I was writing my first book. So it was like the 3 months where I never slept. So it really coincided. Take that. And so we do, normally before COVID, we would do about 18 shows a week. So 7, 9:30, 11:30 every night. Right now we're reopened. We're doing about 14 shows a week. It's so great. It's the return of live music. It's been just a magical place to be the past couple weeks. And so check out our schedule. We're programmed out through March practically. So if there's a show you want to see, get on that calendar. There's lots of good stuff coming up. Yeah, so the things do feed each other. The question is, how do we procure the talent? It's really all about, I love for there to be a variety of different kinds of artists, people of all different ages and backgrounds and different kinds of music. And I just am such a super nerd that I'm like, oh my God, we should get this person from that cast recording I loved when I was, 12. And find, oh, here's this new writer who I love that we should bring to our stage. So it's just me keeping my ear to the ground and knowing a lot about history and theater present, but the books and 54 Below really do feed each other. I find that there are people I've been able to bring to our stage because I interviewed them, people who I've interviewed who, you know, I always say it's like Patti LuPone gave me the most beautiful interview because she knows me as the 54 Below programming director and she's just the best. So they feed each other in a really nice way.
By taking such a comprehensive, from the bottom, starting from the people who work at the very bottom of the chain, how has your knowledge of how theater works increased and changed you and your attitude towards theater?
That's a really good question. You know, I think mostly, honestly, and I said this a little bit earlier, it has to do with the house managers. Like, the house managers are the king and queen of the theater. And there were so many times where I was interviewing a house manager where I was like, they have the best stories. They're the ones who are like completely in charge. And it's one of those jobs, again, that you might never know about when you were going to college for theater. So the main way it expanded my knowledge was just like really wrapping my head around like, oh, this person, everything you do when you walk into that door, like that's the house manager. We all think of it as like the director, the producer, who obviously are so important. And, you know, so many of us in this room are directors, producers, but there were jobs where I would interview someone and be like, oh, I didn't fully grasp the complete import, even though I respected the job. So house managing was one. A lot of said about like being a stagehand was, as someone who's very not talented in that area, learning about that helped me wrap my head around the technical aspects of Broadway a lot more. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you for having us. J. Armstrong Johnson.
Yes, we want to call to the stage J. Armstrong Johnson. And Will Van Dyke, his musical director.
Hi, friends. Oh. We're in person. Maskless. We're vaccinated. We're feeling good. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I haven't done this in a while. So, here we go. Could be. Who knows? There's something new any day. I will know right away, soon as it shows. And make them cannonballing down from the sky, gleaming inside, bright as a rose. Who knows? It's only just out of reach, down the block, on a beach, under a tree. I got a feeling there's a miracle due, gonna come true, coming to me. Could it be? Yes, it could. Something's coming, something good. If I can wait, something's coming. I don't know what it is, but it is gonna be great. With a click, with a shock, phone will jingle, door will knock, open the latch. Something's coming, don't know when, but it's soon. Catch the moon, one-handed catch. Around the corner, or whistling down the river. Come on, deliver to me. Will it be? Yes, it will. Maybe just by holding still, it'll be there. Come on, something, come on in. Don't be shy, meet a guy, pull up a chair. The air is humming, and something great is coming. Could be. tonight, maybe tonight, maybe tonight. I lovely crowd you are tonight. This is so lovely. I always love hearing Jennifer Ashley Tepper say literally anything about theater. Jennifer and I went to college together, and so she's known me longer than most people in New York City. And so to have Jennifer as someone that advocates for me on a regular basis, and for me to advocate for her, she's a writer, she's a director, she's a producer, she does it all. And so for the fact that we got to share this evening together is really serendipitous and very cool. That one of my first times back in front of people happens to be right alongside my very good friend Jennifer. So I adore you, and I'm not gonna cry. So I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm a little queer boy, didn't know it. But one of my very first leading roles I ever got was playing Peter Pan, 13 years old. You know, usually it's Mary Martin or Sandy Duncan or Kathy Rigby, but this little queer boy got to play the role of Peter Pan. And as I was rehearsing the show, my voice started changing. And so every week the keys of the songs would get lower and lower and lower. But I just remember it being a show that meant a lot to me as someone that didn't want to grow up. As someone, you know, every gay boy talks about Peter Pan, so this is nothing new. But the year later, I actually got the opportunity to audition for a professional production of Peter Pan that was coming into my hometown, starring Kathy Rigby. And so she was bringing in her entire touring company, and Kathy's incredible. She brings in all of her family when she tours. Her daughters are in the show. Her daughter plays Jane, and her other daughter's like a mermaid and an Indian, and her son-in-law is Nana, and her son is Nana, and her daughter-in-law is Tiger Lily. I mean, it really is a traveling band of family theater people, which is very cool. And I was lucky enough to be cast as John Darling, so I got to fly with gold medalist the Olympics, Kathy Rigby, at our big opera house in my hometown, and that was my very first professional credit. And I'd like to do a little tune from that, if you don't mind. This song was arranged by my good friend Caleb Boyer. I have a place where dreams are born, and time is never planned. It's not on any chart, you must find it with your heart. Never, never land. It might be miles beyond the moon, or right there where you stand. Just keep an open mind, and then suddenly you'll find. Never, never land. You have a treasure if you stay there, more precious far than gold. For once you have found your way there, you can never, never grow old. And that's my home where dreams are born, and time is never planned. Just Kathy Rigby. We were at our closing night party, and I think Kathy turned 50 while we were doing that show that year. So that was when I was 13. So that was 20 years ago now. So she turned 50. So Kathy's like what, 90 million years old and still playing the boy that won't grow up. But I remember that night asking Kathy, like, Kathy, like, do you have any like advice for like an aspiring actor in the business? And she had her dog in one hand and a Diet Coke in the other hand. She goes, "Don't read your reviews." I listen. I don't read those damn things. I got to take my first trip to New York City 2 years later when I was 15. I was here doing a dance summer camp with New York City Dance Alliance, studying hard, wanting to make it to Broadway. And I remember the very first Broadway show I ever saw actually had my dance teacher's daughter in it. She made her Broadway debut in the musical 42nd Street. Hit it. Will has no idea what I'm saying between these songs, or he's just like... In the heart of little old New York, you'll find a thoroughfare. It's the part of little old New York that runs into Times Square. That crazy quilt, that Wall Street Jack built. If you've got a little time to spare, I want to take you there. Come and meet those dancing feet on the avenue. I'm taking you to 42nd Street. Feel the beat of dancing feet. It's the song I love, the melody of 42nd Street. Little nifties from the 50s, innocent and sweet. Sexy ladies from the 80s who are indiscreet. They're side by side, they're glorified. Where the underworld can meet the elite, 42nd Street. You expected a dance break, I'm sorry to This is called improv dance. Little nifties from the 50s, innocent and sweet. Sexy ladies from the 80s who are indiscreet. They're side by side, they're glorified. Where the underworld can meet the elite. Naughty, body, gaudy, sporty, 42nd Street. So fantastic. I actually got the opportunity to perform in 42nd Street at this show in St. Louis called the Muni. It was like three years ago or so, and I got to play Jim. What's his name? Billy, not Jimmy. It's Billy. Billy. I played the role I paused. I love 42nd Street so much. I'm not like the best tapper in the world, so when they asked me to do the role, I was like, sure, but know what you're getting yourself into. I pulled it off. They only cut me from one of the dance numbers. So it's fine. They were fine. Oh man. So another show that I got to see that trip when I was 15 changed my life, like literally forever. I remember I got to sit in the second row. It was around Broadway Cares time, and so they had like all the posters that the cast was signing and like the red bucket situation. And so I remember it being an exciting night just because it was a curtain speech and it was the show that I had listened to the cast album and was totally excited to see, and staring up at who I didn't realize was going to be one of my heroes, Gavin Creel. It was his Broadway debut, thoroughly modern and lovely. And so I would love to sing a song on that, if you'd let me. Oh, the places I would like to show you, although I hardly know you. I have a funny feeling we'd make the perfect pair. Famous sights I want to see you sing. The nights of you and me. Wait a minute, just a minute. No. I'm a Joe with just one aim. Every night to date a different dame. Call each one of them the same pet name. Hey baby, in a row I have my ducks. Loads of gals to give me loads of yucks. Leave the coup until the other clocks. I don't mean make me got it good. What do I need with love? Always practice what I preach. Keep temptation at an easy reach. Stick to dolls who wash their hair in bleach. I'm happy. Come and go the way I choose. Never gonna sing the tied down blues. Other guys who fill my shoes. No wing couldn't stop me. Got it good. What do I need with love? That was a near miss. Talk about a close shave. Flirting with disaster. There must be someone out there watching over me. Talk about a four-leaf clover me. Peter Rabbit's missing footsie. Means I roll without a tootsie. I got it good. What do I need with love? I got it good. What do I need with love? Skip the vows and all that rot. Tell the minister that I do not. Bright and breezy is the birds and beesy. It's the free and easy is the life I got. Without her. Although I hardly know you. Needless to say, Gavin Creel has become a really, really good friend of mine. My first Broadway show I was ever cast in was Hair, the American tribal love rock musical back in 2008, and they cast me as Gavin's understudy, and I also understudied 7 different ensemble tracks as well. So I knew 2 principal tracks and 7 ensemble tracks, so I covered 9 different people throughout the course of that wild show, and that was a hard show to cover because it was organized chaos. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of hippies running around, smoking pot, doing great things. But Gavin was this leader. Gavin taught me how to lead a show. Not only what it meant to like take on the lead of a show, but to lead backstage and to lead in the community. And he really worked with our producers in the time when we were fighting for marriage equality. So I remember our producers allowed us to take 2 shows off, which is unheard of, to go down to Washington, D.C. to march on Washington for marriage equality. And Gavin was at the forefront of that movement with Broadway Impact. And so not only were we like living the life of these protesting hippies on stage, we were doing it in Times Square and going to rallies and going to marches and really at the forefront of that movement and standing behind Lady Gaga and singing Let the Sunshine In and telling Barack Obama, do you hear us? And we actually, over the course of that year and a half, saw marriage equality pass. So it was really a beautiful experience, not only as an artist, but as a human. And so I look to Gavin as that inspiration for life in general. We've literally been texting all night. He's coming back in from out of town. He wants to get dinner sometime this week, so that's really exciting. Oh, right. So I did a solo. My very first solo show actually was at Birdland Jazz Club, if you've ever been there. And Jennifer Tepper and my good friend Caleb Hoyer actually was my MD at the time. He's the guy that I knew best in New York City when it came to the piano. And so one of the songs I did in that show, I dedicated it to my mother. Being from Texas, I thought I'd have to give you a little bit of Texas flair, and you should probably recognize the song. But here we go. Childhood living, it's easy to the things you wanted, I bought them for you. Graceless lady, you know who I am, and you know I can't let you has been broken. Tears must be cried. Let's do some living before we die. Wild horses, we'll ride them someday. So, the day after I turned 18, I hopped on a Trailways bus and headed to the Big Bad Apple because I wanted to be a rockhead. And let's get one thing straight. I never saw the Red Shoes. I never heard about the Red Shoes. I didn't give a fuck about the Red Shoes. I wanted to be a rockhead because this girl in my hometown, Luella Heiner, she had made it out, and she was a rockhead. Well, she came home to visit one Christmas, and they threw her a parade. A goddamn parade. I told her friggin' baton for 2 hours in the rain. Unfortunately, though, she got knocked up over Christmas. Merry Christmas! And she never made it back to Radio City. That was my dream. New York, New York, here I come. But you see, I had one minor problem. See, I was ugly as sin. I was ugly, skinny, homely, unattractive, and flat as a pancake. Get the picture? Anyway, I hopped off this bus, and my little white shoes, and my little white tights, and my little white dress, and my little ugly face, and my long blonde hair, which was natural then. I looked like a fucking nurse. I had $87 in my pocket and 7 years of tap and acrobatics. I could do a 180-degree split and come up tapping the Morse code. Well, with that kind of talent, you'd think the mayor would be waiting for me at Port Authority. Wrong. I had to wait 6 months for an audition, but finally, the big day came and I showed up to the music hall with my red patent leather tap shoes and I did my little tap routine and this man says to me, "Can you do fan kicks?" I was like, "Yeah, of course, I can do terrific fan kicks," but they weren't good enough. Of course, what he was trying to tell me was the way that I looked and not the fan kicks. So, I said, "Fuck you, Radio City, and the Rockettes, I'm gonna dance on Broadway." Well, Broadway, same story. Every audition, I would dance rings around these girls and find myself in the alley with the other rejects. But I caught on. I mean, I had eyes. I knew what they were hiring. Also, I swiped my dance card after an audition once, and on a scale of 1 to 10, they gave me for dance 10, for looks 3. Well, dance 10 looks 3, and I'm still on unemployment, dancing for my own enjoyment. That ain't it, kid. That ain't it, kid. Dance 10 looks 3 is like to die. I left the theater and called the doctor for my appointment to buy tits and ass. Bought myself a fancy pair, tightened up the derriere. I did the nose with it, all that goes with it. Tits and ass. Had my bingo bongos done, and suddenly I'm getting national tours. Tits and ass won't get you jobs unless they're yours. Didn't cost a fortune either. It didn't hurt my sex life either. Flat and sassy, I would get the strays and losers. Beggars really can't be choosers. That ain't it, kid. That ain't it, kid. Fix the chassis. How do you do? Life turned into an endless medley of G. It had to be you. Why? And ass. Where the cupboard once was bare. Now you're knocking, someone's there. You have got 'em, hey, top to bottom, hey. It's a gas. Just just a dash of silicone. Shake your new maracas and your fine tits and ass can change your life. They sure change mine. Have them all done, honey. Take my word. Grab a cab, come on, see the wizard on Park in 73rd. 14th and nights. Orchestra and the balcony. What they want is what you see. Keep the best of you, do the rest of you. Pits or class, I have never seen it fail. Debutante or chorus girl or wife. Tits and ass, yes, tits and ass have changed my Thank you for indulging me. I dropped out of NYU my junior year of college to go on tour with the first national tour of A Chorus Line. That was my first big gig out of school. And so I'm always like, what song should I sing from A Chorus Line for these things? And you know, Tits and Ass is just the one I go to. It's like appropriating female culture maybe, but I have too much fun with it. My friend Natalie Hall, who's like a big mega television star now, was our Val, and her Val was one of the funniest things I'd ever seen. So a lot of the inflections that you heard in that 17-minute monologue are fully just stolen from Natalie Hall. She was just in a Hallmark original movie. Check her out. She's really, really good stuff. But A Chorus Line has been one of those shows that just keeps giving to me time and time again. I was able to revisit it 10 years after I did the national tour at City Center for their gala. And it was an incredible experience because it was Bob Avian right before he passed away was the director, and Bayor Lee, the original Connie Wong, she set the choreography. And so to have the same people that I worked with at the very beginning of my career playing Mark in A Chorus Line, to then ask me a decade later to come in and play Bobby, the character that's a little older on the line, was a truly exciting and remarkable and out-of-body experience. So yeah, A Chorus Line is one of those things that will always stick with me. I always teach the kids the one or the opening combination anytime I'm going to teach. It's just one of those iconic musicals. So thanks for listening to Sing to the Dance. Okay. When I was 27, something crazy happened, and I was able to be in a Lincoln Center concert, a 55-piece orchestra with the New York Philharmonic of Sweeney Todd, starring Emma Thompson and Audra McDonald and Christian Borle. Lonnie Price directed it. They filmed it for PBS. I was fully coming out of my skin. I was a smoker back in those days. And so I was like, oh, you're about to share a rehearsal room with Audra McDonald, so I stopped smoking that day, by the way. So I stopped. Thank you very much, Jen. That's very sweet of you. Don't smoke, everyone. Or do, it's your life. But it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, God, I am on the right path. I literally get to share a stage with Audra McDonald, so I could die happy now. That's really dark. Anyway, I played Anthony, which is such a fun role. I was actually supposed to go to the Muni in St. Louis. Remember that theater I talked about right at 42nd Street? They were supposed to do Sweeney Todd last year, and then this thing called coronavirus happened. And then they were supposed to do Sweeney Todd this year, and they decided to cancel the show. So now they've moved it to 2022. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I'll get to revisit Anthony in Sweeney Todd. So put some good energy out there for me in 2022. But here's a little ditty from Sweeney. I've fine enough to dream you happy. I was mistaken, Joanna. I'll steal you, Joanna. I'll steal you. Do they think the walls can hide you? Even now I'm at your window. I am in the dark beside you, buried sweetly in your yellow hair. I feel you, Joanna, and one day I'll steal you, till I'm with you then, I'm with you there, buried sweetly in your yellow hair. How's that? Thank you. Okay. So, we have a birthday coming up, so I hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe next week is Jim Brochu's birthday. Will you sing with me, please? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jim. Happy birthday to you. Your friends told me. I was like, well, what are we gonna do? All right, Jim, make a wish.
It's already
Oh! Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Jim Brochu! I love you. We gotta get dinner soon. It's been way too long.
yes, vote, yes.
All right, great. Love it. Yeah, she'd love that. She really would. All right, so my very first leading role on Broadway was in On the Town, that beautiful, celebrated revival. I was doing Hands on a Hard Body on Broadway at the time that I got my first audition for On the Town that was happening at Barrington Stage Company as a summer stock production. And we had gotten word from the producers of Hands on a Hard Body that we weren't doing well at the box office and we were probably going to have to close. And that was my first supporting role on Broadway. I had been an understudy in Hair, and I had been a standby in Catch Me If You Can. And I finally got Hands on a Hard Body, which was the show about Texas, about dusty old Texans standing around a car trying to win, right? So I was like, oh, I know these people. I'm from there. I don't gotta act. I just gotta show up and do my thing, right? So Hands on a Hard Body was this thing that was so dear to me because it took place 2.5 hours away from where I actually grew up. So when we were told that we were going to close, I was pretty devastated. But, you know, when God closes the door, he opens the window, right? So I do remember my agents calling me and saying, okay, there's an audition for a summer stock production of On the Town at Barrington Stage Company, and they'd like to see you for the role of Chip. And, you know, I was rolling my eyes at it, but I was an actor and I wanted to get work, and I was devastated that my first role on Broadway was coming to an end, but you know, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you keep on going. So I walked into that audition and I ended up getting the role of Chip, and I shared the stage with the likes of Tony nominee Tony Yazbek and a very, very good Clyde Owls, Elizabeth Stanley, another Tony nominee. It was Nancy Opal. We were directed by John Rando, who won a Tony Award for his direction in Urinetown. Josh Bergasse came in from So You Think You Can Dance fame to be our choreographer. So I was like, wait, what is going on? we're up here in the Berkshires and we're making like $2 a day, but they happen to build this beautiful coalition of genius artists. And so I remember looking at the girl that I played opposite, and